Hey, it's Jeff Cannata with another NLB mini episode talking about a very big book. This big book, in fact. Look at that bad boy. All 1,080 plus pages of it. It's the sequel to a book that I absolutely loved called The Way of Kings. This is the second in the Stormlight Archives by Brandon Sanderson called Words of Radiance. Pow! A brick! A boom! This is big, epic fantasy. I'm talking 10-book proposed series. This is book 2. Just came out a couple of months ago. Took me a while to get through it, but I finished it last night, and I wanted to tell you my thoughts about it. Hopefully you follow me on Goodreads, and you've been seeing my book reviews there. I reviewed the first book of this series, Way of Kings, and I adored that. I blasted through it really fast. It was a quick read. This incredibly well-realized, unique, interesting fantasy world that Sanderson creates, and it really felt like something completely fresh and new. It wasn't just elves and dwarves and, fantasy tropes that have been sort of played out at this point. I mean, as much as I love me some Game of Thrones novels, we're still, yes, it's a different kind of dwarf, more realistic kind of dwarf, but it's still a dwarf. There's still dragons. It's still the same kinds of things. And as much as I love those things, it's so nice to have this fresh take where we have really unique not aliens, they're new fantasy type creatures, described a whole world that is derived from this idea that there are these perpetual storms, the worst storms you can imagine, that bombard this land, and every single creature that evolves there has to deal with that. So you even have plant life that retreats when stuff is rustled near it. When rain comes down or even a foot comes walking by, plants retreat into themselves. Even grass does that kind of thing. You have crustaceans that are the sort of predominant kind of life in the area. It's really fantastic fantasy world. And more than that, you've got what Sanderson is famous for, amazing magic systems. That first novel, it was really like Iron Man, sort of fantasy Iron Man armor characters fighting Jedi Knights, but uniquely described, interestingly imagined. The powers are explained in detail, how they work, how they relate to one another. Really awesome stuff. And that first book, as I said, I recommended to everybody as soon as I read it. I said, this is a big novel, but you're going to blast through it. It feels like it's at a breakneck pace. You want to devour it. All the characters are interesting. Their plights, there's lots of interesting stuff for them to do. So I was more than thrilled when Way of Kings came out, because I got to jump back into that world. And it's really fun being in this world. I have to say, this one didn't feel as well paced as the first novel. It was a bit of a bummer that really 600 pages of this book, not much is going on. Not really much cool stuff is happening. We're getting a lot of characters sort of standing around thinking stuff. And while it's fun to hang out with those characters, while we're having a great time with Kaladin and Shallan and Davinar and all the people that we love from the first book are back, not much new is introduced for a whole chunk of the book. It's sort of just waiting around for stuff to get kickstarted, and that's a bit of a bummer. When stuff does kick into gear, though, I mean, Sanderson is a master at action sequences, describing action sequences, a really interesting choreography of action sequences, and making it all very clear in his prose, who is doing what to whom and how, and you really feel like you can visualize the action sequences. And there are some awesome ones in this book, as usual. The super-powered action sequences, super cool. And we get to see our characters ascend into their powers that were only hinted at in the first book, and that is really fun, too. And we get lots of new information about this fantasy world, which, as I said, is wholly unique. I think I've said unique about 1,000 times already in this review, but it's something that I want to underscore, because so rarely do we have fantasy novels that really strike new ground and create a rule set and an interlocking social system and all of religions and all the things that make up really interesting fantasy are done here, done so well and so clearly. And we get tons of new information. The Parshendi, which are the sort of evil, or not so evil, who knows, but the opponents for the humans. We actually get some chapters from the perspective of a member of that race, and you get to see a lot of information about what makes them tick, how their social structure is made up, and how they evolve and how they can assume these different forms. And again, these are ideas that I've never seen in a novel before and are so interesting, so fascinating in and of themselves. I just wish the book moved forward at a better clip and there were more big moments. I feel like it gets mired down in these moral dilemmas and sort of internal struggles of our characters. And while that can be fun and you can feel like you really get to know your heroes, and while it's kind of cool to have heroes that do have internal struggles, that don't just always, want to do what's right, they have real conflict, it doesn't make for page turner until we get to that last third of the book, which really picks up pace and some awesome stuff happens. I mean, there is one battle where I was moved by how heroic our lead Kaladin is, and so there's still lots to like, and I can still heartily recommend jumping into the Stormlight Archive. Know that it's a beast. It's a big read, but if you liked that first book, and if you haven't read that first book, you really should. That's the true takeaway, is get in on the ground floor of this universe. It's so interesting. It's so different. It'll make you think about fantasy books in a different way completely. There are so many ideas. It's just jam-packed with ideas about how things interconnect. There's this concept of spren, which are these little essences of things. They're essences of emotion. They're essences of forces of nature. It's just such a visually stimulating idea in your mind, and it's such a different take on everything. It's really, really cool imagination fiction. So while I wouldn't give this the same high marks that I gave its predecessor, I still highly recommend the Stormlight Archive. Honestly, for shard plate wearing, honor blades wielding, fights galore. It's like the coolest Jedi battles you would ever imagine. That alone is worth the price of admission for these books, and really well worth your time. And I guarantee you'll come out of it stimulated in a way you have never been before with a fantasy book. I hope you were stimulated by these videos, and I hope you'll stick around. Next week we got more NLBs coming at you, and you can like and subscribe to this channel for more.